Thank you, Gary, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to 3VA and the wider voluntary sector community across Sussex for having us at this AGM this afternoon. I'm going to attempt to share my slides and let's see if this works. Could you give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides? Can you also see the notes as well? Perfect, good. Okay, so as Gary said, my name is Josh Babarinde. I'm an Eastbourne boy, born and bred, and aside from my career as an entrepreneur, I've been particularly passionate about issues of equality and diversity, and how we can really harness that in Eastbourne and the wider area to create better outcomes for everybody. I've recently become the patron for Diversity Resource International, and Diversity Resource International was set up in 2004 to support Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, as well as newly arrived migrants in Sussex, to help remove barriers to accessing support services and employment opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit more about DRI's work later on, but a critical part of DRI's work, a critical person, is my colleague Ruqia, who I'd love to bring on to the stage at the Mo to do a short introduction to. Ruqia.
Hi, thank you, Josh. It's really great to be here. So my name's Ruqia. I'm the Race Equality Community Development Worker at DRI. So in my day-to-day role, I work to support ethnically diverse communities across East Sussex and deliver various community development initiatives. And some of them you'll hear a little bit more about later on. And yeah, I'm gonna pass back to Josh now to continue and take you to the next part.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruqia. And so we're delighted to be able to kind of spend the next 10-15 minutes or so talking about this subject, putting diversity and inclusion at the heart of service delivery. And we're going to talk about it from a race equality perspective. That's where Diversity Resource International kind of has the experience of working in this area. But we hope that there are some lessons from the kind of race equality experience that can be applied to all different protected characteristics. And I can see some amazing people, Ian, for example, who received his MBE at the same time as I got my gong, who's done some great work in the field of disability in Eastbourne. So there's loads of different expertise here, and yeah, we'd love to do our bit in sharing. And I guess I'll start with kind of the why. Why is it important to support ethnic minority communities to engage in services? Well, the reason that we do this work, the reason that we work to remove barriers to accessing these services is very simple, because the existence of these barriers negatively impacts the life chances and thus a series of life outcomes that are experienced by those individuals. And quite frankly, it's not fair that some communities, like ethnic minority communities in some realms, disproportionately faced barriers to accessing particular services, and thus disproportionately experience worse life outcomes. And we're going to explore a couple of examples, some of which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. So one is in the field of health, which, you know, in the context of a pandemic, has really become exaggerated. And what we know from, say, the Public Health England and Office for National Statistics report that came out about a year ago into how COVID is affecting people, Black men are 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than their white counterparts, which is shocking. And if we zoom in on Sussex specifically, for example, some research by the Sussex NHS commissioners they found that vaccine uptake is lower in local Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And it's actually lowest in Sussex's lowest income Bangladeshi communities. Only 54% of people from those communities in Sussex are taking up the vaccine. And of course, this feeds into the kind of disproportionate deaths that then that community experiences. And there are so many different areas where these outcomes for people from ethnic minority backgrounds are worse. And Ruqia, through her community engagement work, has really got up close to some of the stories. I know has an anecdote or two to share, particularly in the field of mental health. Ruqia.
So yeah, like Josh said, we at DRI, we hear stories all the time, and mental health is a very big issue in the ethnically diverse community. I want to share with you a specific example where a member of the ethnically diverse community flagged that they have been struggling to access mental health services and resources because of language barriers they face. They told us about how they've had really negative experiences, which has been related to the lack of cultural competence of services and practitioners. They strongly felt that race, ethnicity, and religious background were not being considered in the care that they were given. So that's just one example, but there's so many more examples that I could share, and we need to be doing more to support these individuals.
And what's great news is that some of that work is, being done already, and kind of new initiatives being set up to help address this. So the South Downs Health and Care Partnership, as an example, launched the Sussex Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Disparity Programme to look at where outcomes for people from minority communities are worse, get that data in to then be in a position to address it. But health, this is one area where that disproportionality exists. Another area that's very prominent is employment. So if you look at the Office for National Statistics data between October 2020 and December 2020, the unemployment rate across the UK for people from white ethnic backgrounds was 4.5%. The unemployment rate for people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds was more than double, 9.5%. Now, is it the case that people from Black and ethnic minority communities are less qualified or less talented than counterparts in other communities? No, that's not the case. We're all born with great talents that can be deployed in the workforce, but something is happening that's serving as a bit of a bottleneck to prevent their progression into employment. And Ruqia, again, through her community engagement work, has been able to see some of those bottlenecks up close. Ruqia.
So I'm going to share another example of a story that we've heard from members of our community, and a story that is echoed and shared by many more individuals. In this particular instance, a member of the ethnically diverse community said that they felt that their ethnicity was a barrier to getting employment. They felt they were struggling to get a job when they were equally as qualified as their white peers. And this particular individual felt that they seemed to have to change their name to be something more British or more European to be considered for an interview. And this highlights the extent that people feel like they have to go to access the same opportunities as their peers.
And again, though, there is some great work that's being done in Sussex to help to correct this disproportionality. For example, the East Sussex Youth Employment Service have a youth employment advisor who has a specific Black and Asian and minority ethnic specialism to really look at what those barriers are and to tailor support to local people of colour who are looking for employment and who might be at the wrong end of this disproportionality. So those are some of the problems, but it's no good talking about problems if we're not also going to talk about some solutions, which is fundamentally why all of us who are gathered here are doing what we're doing in our communities. And in terms of Diversity Resource International, I wanted to share a couple of pieces of work that we're doing. Again, we'd love for people to cut and paste and adjust and steal like an artist. We're not precious. about this kind of thing. What we're precious about is the impact that it's had in the end and the pursuit of equality as a result. So there are a number of different pieces of work and programs that DRI conducts, and I'm going to hand over to Ruqia, who's going to run through them as a bit of an overview, and then we're going to deep dive into a handful of them.
So as Josh mentioned earlier on, DRI was set up in 2004 with the main aim being to support ethnically diverse communities. And all of the programs we've delivered since then have been in partnership with members of the diverse communities. So we deliver a series of community development programs and short courses to upskill and ensure that these communities feel confident to become financially independent. We offer training for bilingual advocacy and community interpreting and deploy bilingual advocates to reduce linguistic barriers to accessing services. In addition to this, we also support ethnic minority-led businesses to start up and grow via the leadership, business management programs, coaching, and peer mentoring schemes that we offer. This is just a quick overview of some of the things we offer, and like Josh said, we will go into detail a little bit later on.
And so let's kick off with one of them. So one of the kind of key values of Diversity Resource International that we would love to see more, even more uptake of in the voluntary and community sector is kind of the participation of the very people that we're trying to serve in the design of the services and interventions that are being deployed to empower them. Co-creation, co-design. Many of us use it already extensively, but there's always further that we can go. And this is really exciting and really critical because those with lived experience of the inequality that they might be facing, and in the cases that we've been describing, those with lived experience of ethnic disparities are often best placed. They have the insights and in many cases have the solutions. They just need to be listened to. Those solutions need to be refined. They need to be harnessed. And many of, I think what is really powerful is empowering people to identify their own needs, to carry out research among their own communities, to propose those solutions that are then adopted by either organizations that they've set up or organizations like those represented in this virtual Zoom room to help empower them. And a key conduit for doing this at DRI is the Community Researchers Programme that we're about to launch in partnership with the University of Brighton, where we're training up a series of people of colour in their communities to go out and use some academic research techniques to figure out get to the bottom of what some of the ethnic disparity challenges are that they're facing with a view to brainstorming solutions for them. And so our question to you, kind of in the spirit of what we've just described, is in what ways could you involve members of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in the design and delivery of your organization's services, even more than you may be already? Now going to move on to the Bilingual Advocate Programme that Ruqia mentioned. And the Bilingual Advocate Programme is one of the jewels in the crown of what DRI does, and is all about helping to dismantle linguistic barriers that people may be experiencing to accessing different kinds of services, whether they're statutory services or other services that are provided within the community, and services that are designed to help people overcome the very disproportionalities that we mentioned earlier, but all too often, especially for new migrants, language is an insurmountable mountain. But Ruqia has a case study or two around our Bilingual Advocates Programme, which again, we hope might be able to provide a bit of a flavour of it and some inspiration. Ruqia.
Okay, so just for a little bit of context, we've been working really closely with our bilingual advocates throughout the pandemic to provide remote telephone support to the most isolated and vulnerable members of the BME community in and across East Sussex. And through the support, the bilingual advocates have been having bi-weekly phone calls or phone calls every 2 weeks to check in with their clients to ensure that they're doing okay, because a lot of them have faced xenophobic abuse and racist abuse because of the circumstances. So a lot of people do feel afraid to go outside, and people are afraid as well because of the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on ethnically diverse communities. So in this case in particular, one of our bilingual advocates called a client who was suffering from severe cardiovascular complications and in need of immediate medical support. And it was only through our advocate that support was arranged, because they called at the right time and were able to provide assistance when the client was experiencing some of these complications. And in addition to this, our advocates have been making referrals to dental services when there was a need of immediate dental care. They've been making referrals to mental health services, food banks, and emergency health services as well. So they've been providing, like I said, support to the most vulnerable individuals.
Thanks for sharing that, Ruqia. And I guess, yeah, this highlights how, it's a very simple process, not rocket science by any means, can have a really profound impact on someone's ability to access services and thus improve their quality of life and indeed extend their life. Really significant impact. And so, again, in the spirit of this, we'd love to ask, what measures beyond that you might already be taking could you take to break down barriers that members of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities might face in accessing your amazing support services? And then there are some other questions that are certainly questions that DRI has thought a lot about and tried to answer. And it's a journey; these never get completed, but they take us towards that place where we see greater equality, greater equity, and minimized disproportionality. And some of those questions that we'd love to float with you are, what does your staff or your leadership team or your board or your set of trustees look like? What efforts have you made to diversify those different institutions, those different decision-making bodies, so that it better reflects the communities that you serve, so that you accommodate even more opinions, even more insights, even more perspectives that can help enhance service delivery? Secondly, what commitment to diversity and inclusion might be in your organization's current strategy? Is it there? Or is there a way that it can be integrated, not just as a kind of bolt on, but that really lives and breathes through each part of your strategy or your theory of change? And I'll post a link to this shortly after the presentation, but New Philanthropy Capital, many of you will be familiar with it, great organization nationally that supports charities and social enterprises to enhance their impact, has created a set of resources under the banner of Walking the Talk. And this is all about supporting charities and community service providers to better reflect the communities that they serve. And there's loads of great stuff in there, some of which I've been using to really help to get to grips with some of these questions. And so to conclude, we've covered quite a lot of ground in this presentation. And we'd love to cover more with you in the question and answer session that will follow as well. But to summarize, as we've seen in some of those stats earlier on, disproportionality when it comes to ethnicity does exist in East Sussex, which is a sad reality. But the hopeful and optimistic reality that excites me is that charities and the wider voluntary and community sector can play a critical role in helping to correct these disproportionalities. Indeed, we all do in some way, shape or form gathered here. Now, charities can look externally as part of this effort to correct disproportionalities, whether it's by co-designing services with diverse communities, as an example. But charities can also look internally in terms of their service provision to help correct these too. And an example in DRI's case might be through the Bilingual Advocates Programme. But as well as internally, not just in our programs, but in the fibre of our being and who we are, we can look at our teams and our strategies and our theories of change and seek to see how we can diversify them. And something that we can do as well, which is simpler than all of the above and a great kind of immediate next step, is to just check out what other organizations are out there that are engaging with diverse communities, that are engaging with ethnic minority communities. What kind of organizations in the nooks and crannies of our county that we might not have known are there could we find and drop an email to and have a coffee with to see whether there's any scope for collaboration. And to that end, Diversity Resource International has recently published a directory that Ruqia, I'll leave you to explain a little bit more about and then to share in the chat.
So this directory has been put together because we wanted to have a central place where people could refer to in order to understand which statutory services and voluntary organizations, as well as community organizations, are supporting BME and migrant communities in Eastbourne in particular. So we've just completed this directory and I put it in the chat. So I would encourage you to engage with it and share it with your networks as you can, because it's important that as many people access this directory as possible.
Excellent. Thanks, Ruqia. And there are also some businesses in there as well, right? That are either run by people from ethnic minority communities or are serving them in huge part, which is really awesome to see. So we've discussed lots of challenges. We've discussed a number of solutions, and DRI is proud to be playing a key role in the effort to drive some of these solutions in Sussex. But as we all know, collaboration is really the key. And so while we'll be ramping up some of the projects that we've mentioned, we're also even more excited to ramp up the extent to which we collaborate with the likes of you here on this meeting and beyond, to see what we can do to help create an East Sussex that is even more fair, that is even more equitable, and that is even more equal. Thank you so much for listening, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions.
Josh, Ruqia, thank you very much. That was very thought-provoking in terms of getting a greater understanding of the impact and the barriers to the Black and ethnic minority community within East Sussex. Previously, I was working in the London Borough of Redbridge, where you would see that would be a bigger impact. But actually, what you're saying, it's all about individuals in the community who are having those impacts within East Sussex, where people might not be seeing it and might be almost hidden from the wider services, and particularly the access to services themselves. I think you're fortunate today. We've got something in the region of 50 or so people here today on this meeting who all touch many different people across the community, and the ability to extend that understanding of the impact on the diverse community. That really is the inclusion role that 3VA want to play. Just interestingly, because 3VA previously did invite a youth trustee onto the board. Unfortunately, India won't be staying with us going forward. But we haven't, in reality, got a very diverse trustee complement. And we would welcome a conversation with yourself and others of those people you know who may be able to help us understand the community, so as we as trustees can work better across that diverse community, maybe than we do now. So the challenge is back to you in terms of, let's have a conversation about, see if we can get in some new trustees you know, we're more from the more diverse community onto our board.
Yeah, we'd be delighted to work with you on that. And it's a challenge. You know, I'm a trustee myself of several charities, and you know, diversity is hard. Ethnic diversity in particular. I think the Charity Commission produced some stats not long ago that found that I think it was more than 95% of all charity trustees are white, despite the fact that you know, around 15% of the population are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And you know, I'm not the kind of guy who is interested in, you know, figures for figures' sake, or you know, or quotas or anything like that. It's really about the impact that the diverse perspectives can have on service delivery. I'll give you a really recent example, actually. I've spent the last few days doing some in-person training workshops in London, which was an absolute marvel. To get on the train was incredible. Anyway, we were a group of 8, and in this training workshop there were some chairs, and you know, we were kind of sat in a circle, and I just sat on the chair, you know, for the whole day and didn't really think much of it. But throughout the day, some of the girls I noticed were kind of like swinging their legs on the chairs, and I thought, oh, they must be really excited to be back in a room with people. And then we had a bit of a chat about it, or someone made a bit of a joke, and it turned out that the reason the girls were swinging their legs on the chairs is because the chairs were designed in a way that if you've got shorter legs, you actually couldn't put them on the ground. And you know, the assumption that we made as a result of that is those chairs were probably designed by men, and the people who tested those chairs were probably men who have long legs, and so you know, the chair worked great for them, but for women it didn't, and it was really uncomfortable for them. And I guess that, you know, seemingly trivial example is a bit of a metaphor for what it might look like if we don't have diversity, you know, in our trustee boards, in our leadership teams, and more, through I guess not quite ignorance, but through not accommodating or not seeing the need. We can't possibly meet it. And thankfully it was only chairs in that case, but there are more profound impacts of that more widely. So for that reason, Gary, yes, we will absolutely have that chat. Happy to.
Good, thank you. Just want to turn to anybody else who may have a question. I can't see anything in the chat box with any particular questions. Has anyone got a question for Josh or Ruqia? I've got a hand up from Ian Foster. That's the one I can see. Ian, would you like to put your question to Josh? Ian, you're on mute.
Sorry, basic mistake. I'm Ian Foster from Headway in Sussex. I'm very interested in what's been discussed. My background is in public health, and I've just become a trustee at Headway. I'm very interested in how we can influence that. One of the things I'm trying to catch up on what's going on in Sussex, the bilingual applicant programme you mentioned, Josh, is that based at Brighton University, and how many people are involved in that? And the secondary question was, where can we get hold of this directory that you mentioned? That's it, basically.
Great, thanks so much, Ian. I'll take the last question first. The directory, it's in the process of being uploaded to the Diversity Resource International website. It's not quite there yet, but it has been posted in the chat, if you have access to it there. What we'll also do, Gary, with your permission, is we'll send you the directory, and if you were able to distribute that in the kind of follow-up to this meeting, along with the minutes that you might send out, that would be really helpful.
We'll do that.
Great. And then in terms of the other things you mentioned, Ian, so two separate projects. One is the community kind of participatory research project, which is at Brighton University. And then the other one is the Bilingual Advocates initiative. Ruqia, could I leave you to explain a little bit more about how the Bilingual Advocates initiative works and how people go about accessing those services?
Absolutely, yeah. So the Bilingual Advocates Initiative is something that DRI set up like in-house internally. So we work with 52 bilingual advocates who speak a range of different languages. And we are currently taking referrals for individuals who do need support. And after we get referred, we'll assign them an advocate. If you want more information, I'm happy to catch up with you afterwards. But it's very simple the way we've set it up. And our advocates are located around East Sussex, and which is where we mainly work. And yeah, that's the scheme in a nutshell, really.
Thank you, Ian, for that question, and Josh and Ruthie for the response to that. I've got a question next from Liz Treffaway. Liz?
Hello, thanks very much, Gary. Nice to meet you, Josh. Back in the day, before I retired, I set up the Equalities Unit at University of Sussex. I worked as an equalities consultant for about 10 years. And I worked with Gus John and the Commission for Racial Equality many years ago. So it's very inspiring to hear you. I'm now co-chair of Eastbourne Access Group, taking over from Ian Westgate. So it's a hard act to follow. And I'm very conscious that we need to make sure we are more diverse. It's quite a challenge because I know we're too old and too white. As Eastbourne Access Group. I'm also conscious of my work I did years ago with people in ethnic minority communities who have impairments, and I'm very conscious of the double barriers that people with impairments face who come from different backgrounds and different ages. So we'd very much like to have a dialogue with you and to see how we can reach out to younger people and people from ethnic minority communities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I mean, again, at DRI would be delighted, and I'm sure Ruqia is kind of making connections as well already with you know, in her head with various different groups and stuff that she's engaged with in her role. And yet, you know, I think the point you mentioned, Liz, or the phrase you use, reaching out, is the key thing. You know, it can be very easy to, you know, put an advert up on your website or social media or whatever to advertise for people from diverse communities to come and find you. But you know, we need to be more proactive than that. We all recognise we need to be more proactive than that, and you know, we all work with people who experience some kind of vulnerability, you know, in the charity or voluntary sector. So we're all aware of just how much engagement work is required. And you know, sometimes some people say to me, and you know, I know this isn't what you've just said to me, but some people say to me, "Oh, Josh, but it's just, you know, in our area or in Eastbourne, say, there's just, you know, that there aren't very many people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and you know, I'm just not sure that, you know, that there is an ethnic minority in Eastbourne who could fit the bill of being a trustee. It's just too hard to say." And my response is, well, there are 100,000 people that live in Eastbourne, and several thousand of those are people from ethnic minority backgrounds. And I am absolutely confident that just one, if not more, will have the skills, the experience, the motivation to be on that trustee board or whatever it might be. And so just by going through that logic, the imperative then is, you know, okay, we must find that one person. How do we find that person is, you know, the $1 million question. But I think it comes through being quite relentless in that kind of pursuit of engagement. being quite relentless in opening up the directory that Ruqia has produced, and literally emailing every single organization in there. I just think if we take those PPI, those annoying PPI companies, they know that there are people, a minority of people in the country, been affected by the PPI mis-selling or whatever, but they know that they're out there, and they're incentivized by money or the prospect of it to, do absolutely everything possible to reach those people, and they've successfully done it. Well, the sanctity of our aspiration is way more profound. It's better quality of life and the rest, and so that alone should be enough to inspire us to be even more relentless than those PPI people. And that's the reputation that I would love our sector to have, especially down in Sussex. And I think with the collective will of people like those of us gathered here, I think we can get there. And yeah, we'd be delighted to play our part in helping with that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Josh, I've got a question from Steve Lewis from AIRS. I'm going to try and get as many questions as I can before we go to the formal part at 1 o'clock. So, Steve, would you like to put your question to Josh and Ruqia, please?
Hello, Josh. I enjoyed that presentation very much. I'm Steve Lewis from Action in Rural Sussex, AIRS. By the way, nice also to hear Ruqia participating a lot. That makes it a better presentation. So good, very good. My question is, yes, it's a difficult one. So is your work more in Eastbourne itself, in the town, 100,000 people? What about does your work reach out to some of the smaller towns and villages around East Sussex? So, Hailsham and Polegate and Upfield, Crowborough, let alone the smaller villages. And what do you think are the special issues for us, the charity sector, working in some of those really small places where, frankly, people of colour are, in a very significant minority? Maybe not so much in the towns I was mentioning, but in the villages, certainly. Yeah. So what do you think?
Yeah, good question. So to start with, in terms of DRI's scope, it is Sussex wide. So I've my personal Eastbourne loyalty was on show there a lot. I hypocritically was disproportionate in my fanboying of my town, but no, certainly we work across East Sussex, and Ruqia's work goes across every nook and cranny of the county. So I wonder, Ruqia, whether you wanted to take that question around the engagement that DRI is doing or planning to do in some of those more remote parts of our patch.
So as Josh said, we do a lot of work in East Sussex, but through our series of webinars with Sussex Health and Care Partnership, for example, we've been able to work with organisations in West Sussex and Brighton and Hove as well. So we do span a very wide area. In terms of the rural areas, I think definitely the challenges that ethnic minorities will face in rural areas are going to be much different compared to the challenges that we'd see in Eastbourne or Lewis or Hastings, for example. And I think that's why it's so important that we work with organisations like the one that you represent. So if there's any sort of important issue that you feel we need to be addressing, we would love to have a conversation with you about that.
And I also think, I mean, there's not much more I can add to what Ruqia has said, but I think that digital, poses some real opportunities for addressing inequality in rural settings. There is also a threat that people in rural settings will get left behind broadband isn't sorted out in some of those patches, and we rely too much on digital. But if we get it right, and if the infrastructure, and I guess this is a bit of a political question, but if the infrastructure is put in place to enable better digital connectivity, then some of the issues like rural isolation is a humongous one. We might be able to address, and ethnic minority communities in the context of that included. But yeah, we'd love to engage with you and your organisation, Steve.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Steve, for that question. I've got two more I think we can try and fit in before 1 o'clock, Josh. That's first question from Dennis Byrne from Sussex Prisoners Families, and then from Karen from the Wellbeing Tree in Lewis. So I could ask Dennis, please, if you could ask your question, put your question to Josh and Ruqia.
Thanks, Gary. Josh, Ruqia, thank you so much for that presentation and for your challenge to us. It's kind of it's taken on board. It's kind of really interesting about you talk about disproportionality, and for us in the criminal justice system, as you would probably know, black people are more than 8 times more likely to be arrested in Sussex than their white neighbours. And the arrest rate for black citizens was 67 per 1,000 compared to just 8 per 1,000 for white people in Sussex. And members of the ethnically diverse community are also more likely to be given longer sentences for certain crimes than white defendants. Clearly, there are numerous associated health issues, but for us as well, it's how kind of that impacts upon the families and the children and the siblings of those community members. So it was just a kind of a question around how DRI is approaching and challenging some of those issues as we try to do in our anti-racist actions whenever we meet colleagues from the criminal justice sector. And just also kind of to follow on from what other people were saying about our kind of, we would love to be engaged in the community research program. Sounds fantastic. And alongside the other amazing programs that you're delivering.
Great, thank you so much for that, Dennis. And it sounds like the work you're doing is incredible as well. And I'm particularly close to my heart. I spent 5 years working with ex-offenders and gang members in London and trying to get them out. And yeah, criminal justice is an area where the disproportionality is especially bad, whether it's on the issues you mentioned, and then looking at things like stop and search as well. And well, you only have to look at George Floyd to see just how bad it can get when it comes to criminal justice. In terms of our work on that front, interestingly, Ruqia, but just before this meeting, was giving me a bit of an update on some of the work that she's doing with Sussex Police, or planning with Sussex Police. So I wonder whether you want to share that, Ruqia.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. So DRI has been working quite closely with Sussex Police, and this has come up after a lot of incidences of, young people reporting that they felt they've been unfairly stopped and searched, and this was particularly young refugees in the Eastbourne area. So hopefully out of that, we'll organise a roundtable discussion with representatives from Sussex Police and young BME people to just address those concerns and inequalities a little bit and come up with a series of recommendations that Sussex Police can use to better their services or look at their practices. So I think it'll be really interesting to kind of engage with you and see how we can work with you in Sussex Police to try and address some of the issues that you raised.
Dennis, thank you for that question. Very pertinent information and good information you gave from your experience with the prisoners and their families. So thank you very much for that. Karen, can I ask you to unmute and ask your questions to Josh, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh and Ruqia. I'm welcoming this opportunity to talk, make myself known to you, Josh. Wellbeing Tree is a name that hopefully you might vaguely remember.
Of course.
It's a relatively new CIC, and I'm not a trustee. I couldn't at this point in my life commit to that because I know what's involved with this newly set up since January. But just to remind, it's basically reaching out in a very practical and daily way to people who have an identified or not necessarily a medical need. It's not the medical model at all. It's more about people who may be isolated, stressed, depressed, have dementia, learning or physical disabilities, or challenging circumstances at that time in their life, may even be a family carer. But providing opportunities to join groups, and the groups have hugely beneficial therapeutic outcomes. And obviously it's fairly new, so being able to quantify the actual impact is quite difficult at the moment, and we're at the moment struggling with regard to that challenging mix of getting going and funding, and being able to prove that we are worth funding, and also trying to increase participation. And that's the word I was thrilled to hear you use that word, participation, because I thought maybe our groups could be of use to some of the people that are known to you. And I was thinking about you, Ruqia, you with, right there, frontline grassroots. And one of the benefits of Zoom, as we know, is that you're not physically limited. Previously, this group have met in fact, it's meeting this afternoon for the first time since the lockdown easing in Lewes. So a lot of people are in Lewes and surrounding areas, but that's not necessarily to be limited in that way now. So I was just wondering if that's something that, obviously we'll have a chance to talk further about this, but I'm sure our group leader, Hannah Hill, would be delighted to welcome further participation from all members of the community, because it's very much wanted to be not led by trustees or leaders, but a collaborative process where she's actively encouraging those who are members to actually start to lead and take charge and control and make suggestions, which have already been set up now from next week as another group starting as a result of one of the members initiating something.
No, it sounds brilliant to me. Lovely to meet you, Karen, and great. I spoke to your colleague Lisa
Yes.
last week or the week before.
Great.
So yeah, really excited about what Wellbeing Tree is up to.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Ruqia, especially through the kind of scoping work that's just been done with the directory, it would be great to send out some details of Wellbeing Tree's services to some of the folks who benefit from the organisations in the directory, and see whether there can be some cross-pollination. 100%.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Josh and Ruqia, just leaves me to say thank you very much. I think today using the Zoom has proved the ability to build networks, which is obviously a great part of 3VA's role in the community across East Sussex, particularly Lewes, Eastbourne and Wealdon. So thank you very much for your input today. It's been very thought-provoking. And I'm sure you'll get plenty of contacts and just build that community network to deal with the issues of diversity and the barriers to people across East Sussex. So thank you very much for your part in today's meeting.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. And yeah, been a great discussion. And Ruqia, did you want to post some contact details? What the best one might be for you?
Absolutely. I put my email address in the chat, so if you want to get in touch, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But yeah, thank you for inviting us to be part of this.
Thank you, Ruqia. Thank you.